Cap CEO pay. Kamala Harris, you're funded by Wall Street. Kamala Harris is funded by Wall Street. Look at her state of California. It's a mess. Cap CEO pay. Cap CEO pay. Fraud. He's a con artist. Shame on you. Shame on you. You're fraud. You're a globalist Jew. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. You sell out to Wall Street. Shame on you. You voted for the trade deals. You're for open borders. You're not going to replace us.
And the wave still continues. It's not going to stop, nor should we want it to stop. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I think we can be most proud of. So there's a second thing in that black box, an unrelenting stream of immigration, nonstop. Folks like me who are Caucasian of European descent, for the first time in 2017, will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America. Absolute minority. Fewer than 50% of the people in America from then and on will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength.
Undocumented immigrants who are in this country in our law-abiding should be entitled to federal benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, for example.
Look, I think that anyone who is in a situation where they're in need of health care, regardless of whether they're documented or undocumented, we have an obligation to see that they're cared for. That's why I think we need more clinics around the country. And this idea that undocumented, and by the way, a significant portion of undocumented folks in this country are there because they've overstayed their visas. It's not people breaking down gates coming across the border. And so, look, the biggest thing we got to do in this is just tone down the rhetoric. We know why it's happening. It's to create fear and concern. Why are your job in tough shape? Because of that, and then he describes in very graphic, unflattering terms that other, the immigrant. This is ridiculous. And by the way, in America, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Thanks for taking the time to say hello to me. Since the mid-1700s, with occasional bouts of xenophobia.
It's been more than a week since the final votes were cast, and still many of Donald Trump's 72 million voters believe this election was fundamentally unfair, and they're right about that. There was massive outside interference in our democracy, and it didn't come from Russia. The tech monopolies of Silicon Valley used their unprecedented control over news and information to silence Donald Trump's voters, and at the same time to protect Joe Biden. And then public health authorities and blue state governors wielded the pandemic like it was a partisan political weapon. It's hard to believe they actually did that, but they did do it. Corporate America helped them. In a moment, we'll have a report on Big Pharma's role in what happened. It's an amazing story. And then there is the question of the votes themselves, the actual ballots. Democrats completely changed the way we voted in this election. Our system has never been more disorganized, and it's never been more vulnerable to manipulation. So was there voter fraud last week? That's a question we've been working on since election night. We've tried to be careful and precise as we report this out. In moments like this, truth really matters more than ever. False allegations of fraud can cause as much damage as the fraud itself. Jussie Smollett hurt more people with his lies than any actual hate crime. And the last thing America needs right now is more damage. So we want to be accurate. What we're about to tell you is accurate. It's not a theory. It happened, and we can prove it. Other news organizations could prove it too. They've simply chosen not to. The position of corporate media across the country this week has been very simple. There was no voter fraud. The New York Times, once the paper of record, declared that as fact this morning across the entire front page. Look at this banner headline. Election officials nationwide find no fraud. No fraud, none. End of story. Move on and listen to Kamala. Take the state of Nevada, where Joe Biden is currently leading Donald Trump by fewer than 40,000 votes. This year, state Democrats and their lawyers made certain that Nevada sent ballots, not ballot applications, but actual ballots, to every single registered voter in the state, whether they requested those ballots or not. And they did this even though they knew, they were perfectly aware that more than 41,000 people who are registered to vote in Nevada haven't voted or updated their registrations in more than 10 years. Why? Because many of these people are dead or gone, but they got ballots anyway. One of those people was a former elementary school teacher called Rosemary Hartle. According to her 2017 obituary, Rosemary Hartle was a loving, fun, sassy, and sarcastic in a fun way. Beautiful, powerful, relentless, and inspiring. Sadly, now she's gone. But her voter registration remains. She's still on the rolls. Someone received Rosemary Hartle's ballot in the mail and then cast it. Who did this? We don't know who did it. We wish we did. We should know. It's fraud. It's a threat to our system, and it's being hidden by a news media totally vested in a Joe Biden presidency. Again, we have a right to know, we have an obligation to know much more about this. But thanks to the media blackout, it is left to independent conservative sites, places like The Federalist, to report what the rest should be reporting but are not. Thanks to The Federalist, we know that on October 9th, for example, a man called Fred Stokes Jr. received an unsolicited ballot in Clark County, Nevada. That's where Las Vegas is. 3 weeks later, the county received his ballot back by mail. Voting records indicate that ballot was, quote, completed. Fred Stokes voted for president. But Fred Stokes had been dead for 3 years. He died in June of 2017 at the age of 92. How'd that happen? We don't know. No one's reporting on it. Thanks so much, Adam, for joining us tonight. So tell us if we're misreading what apparently happened here. Ballots were sent to people in your state who were dead, and inevitably some of them voted. Is that correct?
You know, first of all, it's important for people to understand there is absolutely voter fraud, as you continue to try to point out, as we continue to try to point out. But in the campaign, we aren't the system. We don't have access to the Clark County voting system. We can't call them and say, it looks like Tucker Carlson died. Can you confirm if he voted or not? This all has to happen on the outside. And so, yes, we've confirmed dead voters. And so finally, we're no longer being accused of producing zero fraud. Now we're being accused of not producing systemic or widespread fraud. And I've been attacked viciously by the sitting attorney general and other people and for being and somehow attacking our system. And last time I checked, I served both in the Navy and in Iraq and was a top law enforcement officer. All I want to do is what you want. I want to put a spotlight on this system because the bottom line is there is fraud. I don't know how wide scale it is for all the reasons you pointed out, and we don't own the system. And America needs to understand this. We keep being told, well, all the fraud will be investigated. By who? There's no investigative body that goes in independently and actually investigates elections. This is why we have this mess. And if they're suggesting that the local registrar is going to do its own audit after the fact, of course we know that isn't a real investigation. The FBI was doing these little videos before elections saying, nothing to see here, it's a secure election, and you're asking the FBI, excuse me, were you in there checking signatures? Were you running lists to see if dead voters have made it on the rolls and actually voted? The answer is, of course not, right? And so this is what we deal with, is that we put out a list of over 3,000 people that moved out of the state of Nevada and they voted in this election. We said we referred it with no names for an investigation. Now, about 100 of these people apparently were military voters and they have a valid exemption. Great. Of course, their vote counts. But we're being accused of improprieties here, and we don't have all the information. They just want to shut down any spotlight to the fact that there is voter fraud in our state.
Of course. I'm not surprised. Adam Laxalt, thanks for that update. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you.
Thanks, Tucker.